Chris says, "Hey, Brian, I heard you sold the business." And I went, "What?" He said, "Yeah, I called an order in this morning and they said you don't own the company anymore." I said, "You're kidding me."
Welcome to the Fueling Deals Podcast, the podcast that teaches how to accelerate your business growth through all types of deals. It's time to fuel up, so buckle in with your host, Corey Kupfer.
There are only two ways to grow your business: organically through sales and marketing and providing great products and services, and inorganically through deals. Too many companies focus only on the first way, organic growth. Welcome to the podcast, which will help accelerate your business growth inorganically. My guests are a huge variety of deal makers and experts on all types of deals who have personal experience that can help you grow, get clear, learn best practices, and avoid mistakes. We discuss everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions to smaller deals that you can do even without significant capital. My guest today is Brian Smith. Brian has charted his own course to become one of the great entrepreneurial success stories of our time. In 1978, he imported 6 pairs of sheepskin boots from Australia with a dream to build a business where every American would eventually be wearing the product. That's how one of the world's most recognizable brands began. And sales of UGG products have exceeded $1 billion in each of the past 6 years. Today, Brian enjoys guiding entrepreneurs and business professionals on their journeys to success by sharing lessons he learned while building the UGG brand. Brian, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I'm excited to have you on, Brian. Listeners, Brian and I met a couple of years back when I saw him speak at a high-end event in LA, and we sort of spoke afterwards and hit it off and ended up exchanging books. And then I brought him into New York to speak to Entrepreneurs Organization in New York. And he had such a great entrepreneurial story and a wonderful journey of building, as you heard, $1 billion plus brand from nothing. So we're going to be talking about that. And of course, this is a deals podcast. So we're going to be talking about some of the types of deals he did along the way, and also the ones that worked and that failed. And I think Brian had said to me at some point that he doesn't actually consider himself to be really great at deals. So we'll delve into that as well, which is how you build a $1 billion brand without being great at deals. So this is great. So Brian, before we get to the story of UGGs and what you're doing now, I want to take you back. And when you were a little kid growing up, what did you want to be? Because I don't know. My guess is running $1 billion company and then selling it may not have been on your mind when you were a kid, but maybe it was. I don't know. You tell me.
No, I was not very entrepreneurial when I started out. I also wasn't very career oriented. And when I left high school, my dad finally put the pressure on me to get a good, steady job. So I joined an accounting firm and began studying to become a chartered accountant, which is equivalent to a CPA here in America. And boy, I hated it. But my nature is not to give up. So I did that for 10 years until I graduated. And I quit the day I did graduate because I was sick of corporate, and I really had this feeling to go out and do something for myself.
So, the second question I often ask on the podcast is what was your first real business, however you consider that? And so in that case, was UGG your first real business, or did you have any
Yes,
kind of business before that? Yeah.
No, it was the first one. But, even when I was an accountant, I can remember being in line at the sandwich shop, and I'd be counting how many people were in line and what the speed of turnover was for making sandwiches. And I'd calculate the profit of a sandwich and try and figure out if that would be a good business. So I was always really intrigued by, the break-even point of how many X's do you have to sell at certain profit to make pay all the overheads and start to make a living. So I think that inquisitiveness was what turned me into being an entrepreneur.
Ah, that's great. So I definitely want you to tell that story. But before we get there, let's just let people know what you're doing now, because I know you got this amazing book out on the birth of a brand that you do in speaking. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. After you've sold the company a few years back. Yeah,
well, I make my living speaking from the stage, and I love it. And I never intended to be a speaker, but when I wrote my book about building the UGG brand, called The Birth of a Brand, it was such a hit that everybody kept saying, "Oh my God, you got to go on stage, Brian, and publicize this." So I was drawn to speaking, sort of kicking and screaming, but it turns out I'm really good at it, and audiences love the messages that I send out because they're very inspirational and motivational. And differing from most speakers who say, I built this and I sold it for millions, and I built that and I sold it for more millions, I talk about the underbelly of the entrepreneurial path, which is, where did you screw up? And here's my story. Don't feel bad. You can't possibly be worse off than I was. and that's what I think is the draw for people to really like me on stage.
Well, no question. And I've seen you a couple of times. Like I said, in the intro, after I saw you in LA, I brought you to New York, and and I agree. The story is
one of my favorite talks, by the way. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah, and people have loved it, and it's a great entrepreneurial story. So yes, let's get into it a little bit. So, so you quit the day after you get licensed or whatever they call it out there as a chartered accountant,
right.
And after 10 years, and you come to the States, and you decide you're going to sell sheepskin boots. Tell us about how that happened.
Even that was a process, and I got to tell you, I'm always guided by my inner spirit, and it sort of speaks to me in the form of goosebumps every time I have a good idea or a new initiative or something. And I remember figuring what could I do, and I just heard the brand new Pink Floyd song, and it was, and then one day you find 10 years have got behind you. No one told you when to run. You missed the starting gun. And I got goosebumps there and realized, shit, I'm been running on the spot for 10 years. And a few weeks later, I got more goosebumps when I was meditating, trying to figure out what I'd do. And I thought, wow, all the big trends are coming from California. So I decided, okay, I'm going to listen to the goosebumps. I'm going to California. I'm going to find the next big thing to bring back to Australia. And I did. And I was in California for 3 or 4 months looking for, the next big thing. And I remember being up at Malibu surfing because that had always been a big dream of mine. And it was October, November, and the wind was getting cold and the water was chilly, and I was putting on my sheepskin boots on the beach, and I went, oh, there are no sheepskin boots in America. And 1 in 2 Australians had some sort of sheepskin footwear. So that was another huge goosebump moment. And so I did my first deal. I called up a manufacturer in Australia and bought 6 pairs of samples from him and got a deal to be his distributor. And that was really the birth of UGG.
So let me stop you there. Let's just talk about that first deal, right? So you're, how old are you at this point?
29.
All right. So you're 29. It's 1978. You go to California. Now you call this manufacturer in Australia and you say, hey, I'm a 29-year-old kid. I want to be your distributor in the U.S. How does that deal get done?
Well, he didn't want to do it at first, but luck plays such a great part in everything. And he took down all my details and he called up the Department of Trade in Perth in Western Australia and was trying to get some information on me. And by pure fluke, he happened to talk to a buddy of mine who I played rugby with before I left. And he gave me the greatest, recommendation. And so the deal was done purely out of luck because there were a lot of other people in America looking to buy boots from him, so he said.
So it's great. Okay, so now you have a manufacturer lined up, but you've just ordered samples for 6 pairs. What happens then?
Well, I was with a buddy. We were going to start this together, and we realized we needed capital, to buy 500 pairs of samples, 500 pairs of product, and my roommate overheard me talking and said, hey, there's some guys at my office, looking for investments. And just like that, without a business plan or anything in writing, we just on the enthusiasm that I had for how big it was going to be, they put in 20 grand, which I believe in today's terms is about 70,000. So it was a lot of money. And we did a 50-50 deal and started business that way.
Oh, I love it. So what's become, a $1 billion plus in revenue company started on getting a manufacturer through luck, a luck of him speaking to somebody you knew who knew you, and then a buddy of yours and a roommate and $20,000. So
Right.
So they put in $20,000. They get 50% of the company. Any kind of documentation on that? How did you do that deal, quote unquote?
We went to the lawyers and got a partnership agreement drawn up.
Great.
But that capital lasted us for a couple of years because it wasn't an instant hit. The first retailers, no shoe stores wanted to know about sheepskin in California. But the surf shops were really keen because all the California surfers who'd been to Australia on their surf trips had brought some back for their buddies. So within the surf market, it was really well known. So that's why Doug and I my buddies decided to raise the money and bring in 500 pairs. And so we went back to the surf shops who told us it was going to be so fantastic to sell them all. And they go, oh man, well, congratulations, but we couldn't sell them in our store. We only sell surfboards and trunks and sandals. Good luck with the shoe stores, man. So our first year sales was 28 pairs, if you can believe that.
So that's a great lesson, right? Everybody says they're interested till they have to write it. It's a great idea till they have to write a check.
Yeah,
right?
We should have asked for orders up front. But then again, if I had asked for orders up front, nobody would know about UGG because I wouldn't have done it.
Right. Because people would have said no, right?
Yeah.
All right. So what happens from there? So you have minimal sales in the first year. These people you expected to buy don't buy. What happens then?
Yeah. Well, I got 3 years of summer jobs. Because it was just dinkling along 5,000, 10,000. The third year, I think we did 20,000, and our capital ran out. And that was like the first time I thought about giving up the business. But I did an interesting thing. I had a beer with one of my buddies who owned a surf shop, and I was telling him, my dilemma that sales weren't happening, and he called out to all these little young 12, 13-year-old grommets, who stored their surfboards in his shop, and he said, "What do you guys think of UGG?" And they all went, "Oh man, they're so fake. Those models in those ads, they can't surf." And I realized I'd been sending the wrong message to my target market. So I got a couple of young pro surfers who are just, they're just 16, 17 years old, just about to turn pro. And I started running ads with them, and the sales went to $200,000 like in one season, purely because I nailed the marketing image. And I made it so cool. If these young kids are, they'd read the ads and, "Oh, Mom, I want a pair of Uggs for Christmas." And that was really what turned it around. But in that success came another disaster. We were out of money. So then my next deal was to split our 50% down to 25 and bring in another investor who bought in a container of boots, which was $120,000.
Okay.
And so we did that for another 3 or 4, 2 seasons. And then sales were really starting to catch on now. California was really getting hot for UGG. But then we ran out of his money. And so and the problem is that, he thought he could just double his money by buying a container of boots, but he didn't realize the overhead and the marketing and all the, stuff that goes on. So he wanted out, and then I was stuck between him and getting new investors in, and the new ones, I'm saying, well, the trademark's worth, $100,000. No, the trademark's worth nothing without our money. And so we ended up, I did a deal to buy my partner out, both partners out, and where I was on the hook for paying them royalties. And then I joined with a third group out of Anaheim, and there were 3 guys who were going to bankroll it for the next, phase, which was going to be a couple of $100,000. And I was absolutely stoked. Even though I was only going to get 25% of the company, I now had, 3 other guys in the business. And part of the deal was I didn't have to run the company anymore. They were going to do that. All I did was go on the road and be the salesman. And, I thought all my problems are over now with this new round of financing. And it lasted about 3 days. I fixed up the warehouse, moved all the inventory into the new building, and then I went down to Huntington Beach to my first sales call as a 100% salesman. And I walked in the door, and I think his name was Chris, says, "Hey, Brian, I heard you sold the business." And I went, "What?" He said, "Yeah, I called an order in this morning, and they said you don't own the company anymore." I said, "You're kidding me." And I couldn't wait to get out of there, And part of the deal was that I had this little trademark lawsuit I was in that they wanted me to finish that before I actually got my certificate for the 25%.
Okay.
And, I called up the guys in Anaheim. I said, "What the hell are you telling people?" They said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "You tell them I don't own the company." And they go, "Well, you don't, you haven't finished the trademark lawsuit." And, oh, man, I just went into this huge depression. And for 2 or 3 days, I moped about, having lost the business. And, there was a great time to give up again, after all these troubles I'd had. And I ended up after about the 3rd or 4th day, I remember I was turning off the television one night, lying on the floor on my back, and I rolled over on my hands and knees and started crawling to the bedroom. And my wife, who was a really quiet person, just said, "You get up now and walk to bed like a man." It scared the shit out of me. And I stood up, and it was like coming out of a fog. And I thought, oh my God, there's so much more to life than this crappy little sheepskin company. And that is, again, I attribute that to my spirit inside again, giving me clarity. And I slept like a baby that night. And the next day I had a choice, what am I going to do? And I was meditating again, would I be a business broker or a real estate agent or accountant? Never, And I thought, I really have come to love sales. So what can I sell? And these goosebumps hit me, and I thought, shit, I love Ugg boots, So I ate humble pie, and I went back up to the guys at Anaheim and said, "Look, I may never own the company, but I really want to get a pair of Ugg boots on every single person's feet." And so I went back on the road, and they agreed not to tell people I'd sold the company. And about a month later, I got back to the warehouse, and Neil, the owner, one of the owners, he handed me a check for $5,000 and says, "That's your commissions." And that was the first money I'd ever pulled out of the business. And the next month I got a check for 10 grand, and the next month another check for 10,000. And I realized, I've come to sort of love all these little philosophical sayings that I've learned over the years. And in this instance, it was like your most disappointing disappointments become your greatest blessings. Because here I was, lost the company, but I'm making more money than ever. And I'm on the road with all my surf shop buddies, and I'm having a ball playing golf in the summer and surfing and making all this money. And that became my story for the next couple of years. It was amazing.
So it's interesting. I want to break down a couple of things for our listeners on the deal side, and what happens with the companies, and also there was something I remember you said when I heard you speak. So so this is an issue that a lot of companies go through, right? Raising capital, having the capital run out. Mm-hmm. How do you find other investors? Will the original people put in more money? No. If so, how do you take them out? Yeah. Taking out partners you talked about, and that's a deal, right? How did you, deciding to buy out your partners, and then, so these are experiences that a lot of companies have, and in fact, this is often, it's not unusual for a founder to lose control of a company, and you actually got to the point where there was a point where you had zero equity left, and I don't think you specifically said it on this call, but do I remember correctly from one of your talks that when you said you went back to them, you had actually quit, right? Before your wife, then it's that with your wife. You had told them, you'd originally said, "I'm out of here." Isn't that true?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
It was. I just went silent for 3 or 4 days.
Got it.
I didn't quit, but I didn't also come back to work either.
I got it. You just disappeared for a little while.
Yeah.
So I love that. Yes, I love So you got through it, and I love the the conversation of how you get these goosebumps and how the truth comes from inside. But I also love the fact that it's great when we have people who support us and sometimes call us forth in moments when we when we may not be there ourselves yet.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's very valuable.
That's
And the
great.
irony is that, here I was for the next 3 years out on the road, and now I'm developing a sales force across the country. I've got about 30 sales reps, and business is doing really well. We've branched out of surfing, and now we're into snowboarding and skiing. And I was trying to figure out what do kids back in New York and Chicago and Michigan do, and I realized that they all play hockey in the winter. So I got into the hockey retail market, and that was fantastic because all the moms who have to sit in the malls were buying UGG boots for their kids, and then the moms are buying them for themselves, and it really became a vibrant business. And I made 80,000 the next year, and 120 the next year, and 150 the next year, and back then that was a shitload of money.
Yeah.
And I was loving my life as a non-owner. And over those 3 years, I put up nearly 2 million frequent flyer miles just traveling with all the sales reps. So I was getting to know every buyer all across the country. And then the weirdest thing happened, but Neil, the one main owner, had bought out the other two guys, so he owned 100% of it now. And he said, "Hey, Brian, come on in next week. We're going to get the lawyers in, and we're going to issue you 25% of stock." And oh man, I was in heaven because I'd finished the trademark lawsuit and everything. And we bought company cars for each other, and we got life insurance policies on each other. And I was all set to come in next week, and my wife called me on the car phone over the weekend, and she goes, "Oh, Brian, Neil's just died."
Wow.
And my life crashed again because here I was on the verge of getting my company back, and now I didn't own it I still didn't have any of it. And now his widow, who never set foot inside the warehouse, owned 100% of it. And so I had another come to Jesus meeting, and I figured, my livelihood's sort of tied up here. So I went up and I talked to her the next day and said, "Look, I'll offer my life for the next 6 to 9 months to try and save the business." And that began the longest, 6 or 8 months of my life because I had to try and raise money. And the weirdest thing is that the banks, even though we were now 8 or 9, nearly 10 years in business, the banks are all saying, "Oh, it's a fad. It won't be around next year." And I go, "But wait a minute, everybody loves these." "Oh, but you've been lucky. It's a fad." And so it was really, really difficult to raise money conventionally. And, the investment bankers that I approached, they saw zero income for 9 months and then this huge spike for October, November, December. And that scared the heck out of them. So they weren't interested.
Right.
So it went through all the way through October. No, it was like April, May, June. July was really starting to get desperate because I had to deliver in September. My original supplier, the guy that we'd been buying boots off all this time, he started to jump ship thinking I wasn't going to be able to pull it together. And I was, making up all these orders, 10,000 pairs. I'd send them down to him and go, "Hey, George, it's going to be fantastic. You trust me, I'll get the money." And he, was a little nervous. And bit by bit, I started losing faith that he was ever going to come through. And it got to September, October. No, I'm wrong again. It was July, August, and the big trade show that kicks off the season was in September. And as a last-ditch effort, I thought, who could benefit from me being alive? And I figured out that tanneries in Australia should be really hot on this. And I found one who was really, really interested, but his name was Gordon. And I said, I've been working with this George Bircher in Western Australia. I just need some skins to get started. And he was so close for 4 or 5 days to backing me, but he eventually didn't. And so I left Australia without any deal for production. And then it was September. I had to go to the trade show, and I talked to my wife. I said, if we do this, we make sales, we're not going to be able to ship anything. And we had about $2.5 million worth of orders on the books. And I had no idea where we were going to get production from. So I ended up going up to the trade show and setting up and putting all last year's product out. And in the meantime, my sales rep had told me about another group that was selling sheepskin boots in California, and that they were a windsurfing company. And I thought, well, they can't be much competition. And so anyway, I set the booth up at the trade show, and I figured I'm going to go find that windsurfing company and figure out where they're at and what they're selling. And I walked over towards their booth, and I stopped short because there was all of my production, everything that I'd ordered, with different labels on them. The label was called Thugs, which I thought was really appropriate,
And they actually, do I remember correctly? They actually cut a deal with your original manufacturer, right? Wow.
Yeah, and my manufacturer George never told me, so I was totally blindsided. And I went through the motions of the show. I talked to my wife and I said, we're not going to tell anybody, but on Monday after the show, we'll call all my best retailers and tell them to buy the Thugs because it's our own product anyway. And so after we packed the show up, I got home back to San Diego, and the last call I made was to Gordon at the tannery. And I said, listen, Gordon, I really appreciate all the help trying to get this going, but George has done an end run around me, and I'm out of business. And he was sad, and we went to bed, And about 2:00 in the morning, the phone rings, and I pick it up, and he goes, Brian, it's Gordon. Screw George, I'll get you all the boots you need. and just like, how's this for a deal? No handshake, nothing in writing. I sent all the patterns down, and he duplicated them, sent them out to about 4 or 5 manufacturers, and he cranked up his tannery. And after about 2 weeks, we started getting 2,000 pairs on a Friday, then 5,000 pairs. And then all through October, November, December, every Friday we got 5,000 pairs in. And at least we stayed alive. We threw away over $1 million worth of orders at wholesale. And but the thing is, we stayed alive. And the product was pretty shitty compared to the other stuff that I'd had, because I had so many years to work on product development. But didn't matter, because there was boots out there with UGG labels, and UGG was still alive. So that was just, it was the best deal. Just one Aussie to another saying, hey, you got screwed. I'm not going to let that happen,
Wow.
And that became the deal of the century for me.
Wow. And so and he continued to be your manufacturer for a while after that, right? Connected you with the other. Wow.
All the way through till I sold the company. Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. And listen, that's, it's funny because there are industries in which, it's rare that people do deals on handshakes in these days, but it still happens. I mean, in the diamond district in New York, they lend people diamonds all the time. It's and then even in other industries, that's why business relationships matter and reputation matters. So
the relationships are critical, and my best deals have all been done with people who had good intent. It doesn't matter what documents you can prepare for a deal. If someone's out to screw you, it's gonna happen.
That's absolutely right. I mean, Brian, one of the things I say as a lawyer, which, you may not, you may think I'd be big on. I mean, I am big on documenting deals, but I say the documenting only serves two purposes. One is the one that people think about, which is that it tells you what your legal rights are if somebody does end up screwing you, and you can sue them and whatever. But the truth is that's not what you want to be doing. And often if somebody's a real crook, they're not going to have any money. You can't find them, whatever it is. So, The second thing it does, though, that's important is that it helps get what us lawyers call a meeting of the minds. Like, it really, like, the process of documenting a deal will help to try to make sure that there was a true understanding, common understanding, so there wasn't any misunderstanding. But I always say, listen, once the deal is signed, ideally, in the old days when I first started practicing, I used to say, put it in a file drawer. Now I say, you file it online. And hopefully you never have to look at that document again, because business deals are made on an ongoing basis based upon relationship, not based upon legal agreements.
Absolutely, yeah. And having that commonality of destiny, is the critical thing. You both have to figure out what the goals are. And I wrote in my book at the very end, because that was, 10, 15 years after I sold the company. And I realized, as much as I hated these people at the time, and there were several, investment groups that I really hated, I realized that, they were all trying to do the best deal they could for themselves.
Yep.
And I didn't take the time to understand what their end goal was, right? Mm-hmm. Their end goal was quite clear when they signed the documentation. They weren't out to screw me. They just figured out where they were going, and I was just a part of the piece, And so I've come to not look at them as crooks anymore, but people I should have got to know better before I did the deal, to try and understand, are we both seeing the same mountain that we're going to climb? Because, quite often I'm looking at my mountain and they're looking at theirs. And eventually you got to split up,
Well, that's right. That's right. And I always talk about in negotiations, what are your objectives? What are their objectives? And do the objectives meet? And just because they don't meet doesn't mean that they're bad people. It just means they have different objectives.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So eventually, not only were you saved there, and did you get that, you stayed alive by putting out some product, but then, you really grew the company, and I don't think anybody's heard of Thugs in a while, right?
No, they were. I don't even know where their product ended up, because I never saw them in the marketplace. And here's the kicker, right? So after Christmas, between Christmas and New Year, two really weird things happened. The customs broker screwed up, and he shipped 2,000 pairs of Thugs to me and 1,000 pairs of my boots up to the other guy, and he was up in San Clemente, which was about an hour away. So I agreed to go up and swap them around. And, I was driving back home, and I was thinking, how come we couldn't keep boots in our warehouse for 24 hours? Every Saturday morning we were stripped clean, because all the retailers were driving into our factory, picking up whatever they could to take back to their stores. So we were clean every Saturday morning, and the Thugs warehouse, which was twice as big as ours, was floor to ceiling full of sheepskin boots after Christmas. Mm-hmm. And that's when I realized the loyalty of my customers was so strong that they threw away nearly $2 million worth of sales at retail, rather than, join with somebody who they knew knocked me off. So that was an incredible revelation on the power of customer service. But the bigger fluke was that the life insurance policy paid out on Neil, and it was just enough money for me to buy the company 100% back from his widow, where she got full value for the season's profits, plus all full value for all the assets. And had I left it to her and walked away at the beginning of the year, she would have got zero. So just having the faith to hang in there against all those odds paid off for me, where I was still broke, but I owned 100% of UGG again. I mean, who could have ever seen that coming?
Yeah, who would have? I mean, listen, if it didn't really happen to you and it was in a movie, people would say, "Oh, that's not realistic. That could have happened in real life, right?"
Mm-hmm. No, it was amazing.
I love it,
and I feel blessed and lucky. But boy, I could have walked out several times during the course of building the UGG brand. There was so many times when it was looking hopeless that I could have walked away. But just having the faith that there's another deal that can be made that can keep me alive is really what every entrepreneur has to have the passion and the persistence for. Because as long as you got the passion, there's a way to make it work.
And that's why I think your speaking in your book resonates so much with entrepreneurs, because, I don't know. And Brian, you know this about me, that I'm very active in the entrepreneurial community through Entrepreneurial Organization and other ways. So I see, and my clients are entrepreneurs. So, I hear the stories and what it seems like from the outside is never the case. And everybody's had a journey. It may not be like yours. It's different. It's their own journey, but there's always ups and downs on the path. I've had my ups and downs as an entrepreneur. Everybody has.
Yeah.
So I think people really resonate with that. And I think one of the things that makes us different about entrepreneurs is that, people who are not truly entrepreneurs there were so many opportunities in your journey that it would have been so easy to quit.
Yeah, for sure. But do you want to hear the best deal I made?
Absolutely.
Okay. There's a little bit of a backstory here, right? So when I started out in those first couple of years where I was clueless, I was selling boots out of the back of my van at Malibu, and had a really good little retail business going. And 2 or 3 spaces up was another guy called Doug Otto, and he was selling these neoprene sandals. They were called triple deckers because they were pink, yellow, and pink neoprene with a, like a thong type thing. And we used to see each other on the road for years, and we'd always joke with each other, hey, you should buy me out, oh, I can't afford it. And we would joke around like that. Well, fast forward to 18 years, and I've just done a deal with I was referred to Oprah via Trudy Styler, who is Sting's wife, because we've been shipping boots to her for years. And she one day called me up and said, Brian, I need a big favor. I've just been to a seminar. It's changed my world. And can you get me the most perfect set of boots? And here's the address, Oprah Winfrey. And so I sent boots to her, and she immediately ordered more boots for everyone in her staff. And we had developed a really good image with the product, and we'd just come off a $15 million season, and the pre-orders were looking like it was going to be a $20 to $25 million season coming up next year. And I had absolutely no way to finance this increase in production. Mm. And so I knew I was, probably going to be out of business again. But I was going to a trade show called the Super Show in Atlanta, Georgia. And my buddy Doug, who I mentioned earlier, he got the license for Teva sandals. You're probably familiar with them.
Sure.
And he took his company public on Teva, and I knew he was sitting on about 25, 30 million bucks in cash, right? Well, I arrive in Atlanta airport, and way up the other end of the baggage claim is Doug. And I got those goosebumps again. And I went, oh, shit, it's perfect. So I walked up to him, and, we saw each other and we high-fived, and I said, Doug, if ever we're going to do it, man, now's the time. You die every winter. My company dies every summer. Let's put them together, man. Just buy me out. And we had the accountants talking that afternoon, and, with all the legal documentation that needed to be done by the end of the season, he bought me out for cash. So it was like going public without going public. It was phenomenal.
Wow. So, there's so many themes that I hear in your story. Obviously there's the theme of persistence and always fighting through and getting up. But also, every deal that you've done, really, like we said earlier, that's another long-term relationship, right? One of the things I talk about authentic negotiating, authentic deal making, but I also talk about authentic business relationships.
Yeah.
And for me, I feel like, that's a big part of your story, right? These aren't strangers. In every situation, it's somebody that you knew or you got to know. And this is, your final sale was a guy you knew for a long time.
Yeah. It comes back to trust, Gordon Jackson at the tannery trusted me, Doug trusted me to not try and do a weird deal around him, and everything just went beautifully because of the relationships.
Great stuff. I love the story. It's really so. Listen, folks, if you have an opportunity to see Brian speak, if he's coming to your area, you've gotten a piece of it here, but it's such an inspiring story, and also his book, The Birth of a Brand, is just a brilliant read. So Brian, yeah. Before I ask you my last question, if people do want to find out more about you, find out about you speaking, find out about the book or anything else you got going on, what's the best place for them to find you, reach you, call you, whatever?
Well, thanks. Yeah, the book is called The Birth of a Brand. And I just recently did the audio version because so many people today want to listen to the book rather than read it.
Sure.
And it was going to be my chance to revise and update it, when I did the audio. And I read it through to do the edits. And in the end, I changed 0 words. It was, the book is so damn good as a roadmap for entrepreneurs. And not just starting out, but it does include that. But also when you start to get into the $5, $10, $15 million range, there's a whole set of different problems come up, which I help readers through. So that's called The Birth of a Brand on Amazon. And as far as speaking goes, obviously the EO group that you brought me into is a group of business people who absolutely love my story. So if anyone's listening who would like me to come and speak to their company or their association or whatever, you can find me at uggfounder.com, and all the contact information is there on my speaker page. And I would love to hear from you if you think I could show up and give you a really entertaining story for an hour or so.
Oh, that's great. So my last question, it's interesting that I asked the same last question of every guest on the podcast, and I feel like we've talked a lot about it in your case, but I'd love to ask it anyway. So as you know, one of my highest values is authenticity, and it's the reason my book is called Authentic Negotiating.
Right.
And we, and for me, authenticity is something.
By the way, your book is one of the best books that I've ever read on negotiating. So I've given it out to a bunch of people. It's a phenomenal book.
Oh, Brian, I appreciate you saying that. I really do. That's so nice of you. And so for me, the conversation of authenticity is not about morals or ethics or some outside force. It is that internal self-awareness, all right, and making your business. You talk about the goosebumps you got, right? And for me, that's a signal of what's authentic and and what's guiding. So that's why I feel like you talked about it a lot. But I'd love to hear any last thoughts you have on the importance of authenticity and how it's how it's guided your life, and maybe how do you tap into that authenticity? What do you have any practices or ways that you stay aligned?
Sure. I've been a big believer in this spirit inside me, and I believe it's in every single one of us. That I don't know if any of your listeners are Bible people, but over and over again, Jesus said that the kingdom of God is within you. And what I think he meant by that, he was being very literal. There is a spark of this pure God in every one of us. And that is an infallible truth meter. And every time I get really perplexed or down or whatever, I meditate and I go within and I just ask for the truth of a situation. What the hell should I do here? And it's uncanny how after a while, it doesn't happen instantly, but after a while, you just get this feeling that this is the way I should go. And I've followed that. And I'll tell you what, there's times when I haven't followed, I've had the feeling and I go, no, that's not right. It just can't be. And I've gone against it. And every time I've gone against it, I've paid the price. But every time I've gone with it, things seem to have worked out. So there is some sort of internal guide in us that knows the direction. We just got to get better at tuning into it.
I so believe that as well. And, and it's interesting. We've talked about some of the themes in your story of the persistence in the business relationships and whatever, but at least for me, and you can tell me if you disagree, the single biggest theme is you trusting that inner wisdom and, and tapping into that guidance. And I think even with all the other stuff, the level of success you have with UGG and now as a speaker, et cetera, wouldn't have been the same, wouldn't have been close to the same if it weren't for that trust and that tapping into that authentic place.
Yeah, nobody would have heard of UGG if I hadn't trusted in the first time.
I love it. Brian, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Corey, it was a thrill. Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you, Fueling Deals listeners, for tuning in. Remember, there's only one difference between companies that grow inorganically and those that don't. And it's unrelated to size, amount of capital, or any other factor, other than that the owners and executives of companies that do deals make a decision to do deals, and then they take action. Well, it's time to refuel. So until next week, Corey Kupfer signing out.
Thank you again for tuning in. Be sure to leave Fueling Deals a rating and review on iTunes and Google. Check out all our episodes at fuelingdeals.com to find out more resources to accelerate your business growth.